And welcome back. This is Don't Go Down There, Part 2 by Closet Brony 87. With a hoof that was like ice inside her boot, she tapped on the door of the Golden Oaks Library with all the energy she could muster, as meager as that was. After a second, as if she was waiting by the entrance, Twilight opened the door. Fluttershy had rarely seen her in the state she was currently in. Twilight was not usually one to worry about her looks too much, that was Rarity's realm, but usually at least tried to keep a hygienic appearance. Right now her mane was in shambles, a veritable bird's nest of misplaced strands of caked, unclean hair. There were great bags under her eyes, as if sleep had eluded her for many nights. But it was her eyes themselves that were the most unnerving. They were askew, much like Derpy's had been. Pupils small, focus uneven, a gaze that stared out into the unnumerable void. Even as she looked towards her guest, her eyes focused through her. "Hello, Fluttershy. What brings her here?" she asked with a smile much like Pinkie had given her earlier, entirely too big, too inappropriate, too happy. "Oh, hi, Twilight. I was wondering if we could talk." "Of course, friend." Her smile, if even possible, became more maniac upon uttering this word. "Please come inside." Fluttershy breathed a sigh of relief. Even if Twilight's mannerisms were unnerving, at least she would be out of the hateful, insipid cold. She followed her into the dark of the treehouse, lit only by a lonely candle flickering on an end table. Twilight sat down on a couch in front of the empty fireplace and looked up towards her friend. She nervously sat down on the other end of the couch, keeping as much distance as possible between herself and the unicorn. "Am I right in thinking you're here with the winter blues again?" Twilight asked her. "Oh, yes. Maybe I could get you a book. I have one about psychology and the environment that might help." "I don't know, Twilight. I don't think I can really concentrate on reading." Twilight turned her overbearing smile towards Fluttershy. "I really don't see how you girls can get bored reading. But I might have something a little more engaging. How about The Madness of Ponyville?" The madness," she stammered, unable to finish the title that inexplicably filled her heart with fear. "The Madness of Ponyville, right. It's one of my favorites," she explained as she floated a worn and stained leather book over them. "It might be easier for you to stay focused because it's a narrative. Why don't we read it together?" Twilight set the book down on the couch between them and turned towards the brown fireplace. With her magic, she picked up a rusted poker and agitated the cold, dead ashes. Fluttershy felt a chill. She desperately wanted to ask her to build a fire to ward the cold away, but something in the back of her mind told her not to. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that talking to her friend was a bad idea. A deathly bad idea. She felt like acknowledging the strangeness to any pony but herself would somehow awaken it, would somehow give it ultimate power over her. She remained in obedient silence as shivers of fear and cold overtook her. "This entry is dated 90 years ago," she started Twilight. "I saw it and watched as the entire town, no more than 100 ponies, chanted of misery. The air was cold, full of hate. I so wanted my torment to end that I would do anything to stop it, but it appears that I am the only one who feels the pain without succumbing to it. Pain will make any pony go mad. Hopelessness will make a pony yield to insanity. The town watched in stoic reverence as the moon was made of blood, and spirits as a sin made manifest. They chanted as every evil of ponykind grew from the rotted cadaver's decency. Ponies I knew, ponies I loved, ponies that were kin stared into the empty space, every semblance of restraint and reason conspicuously absent from their lustful eyes. If blood was to be spilled, it was to be spilled by all of them, guiltless all, or so they conceived themselves. For they all remembered it to be known to them or not, just wanted to see the spring once again. They all wanted, no, needed the winter to end. In the spring, they would once again pretend to themselves and the world that they are guiltless. In the winter, nature herself will remind them otherwise. As I watched, monuments to their sin erected from the ground and consumed every innocent structure they had erected. Great, macabre structures that I dare not speak of manifested themselves to me. Those around me who allowed themselves to be taken in by the madness seemed not aware, their minds too far gone. The horrors that I saw, the blacknesses that I felt, it was too much for a mind intent on clinging to the last crumbling edge of sanity. I write this entry in my journal now before I do the only decent thing possible. The very foundations of the world conspire against me to sentence me to the torment I so deserve. Mayhaps the cosmos will find forgiveness for my dark soul. I can only hope that spring will come. Quia de sanguinem remissionem pacatorum. Twilight gently closed the book and turned to smile at Fluttershy, who was quivering more so than she had all night. "Did you like it?" Fluttershy could only shake in response. What would Twilight say if she said no? What would Twilight do if she lied? Either option seemed perilous. Twilight only continued to smile at her, as wide and unnatural as she ever had. Her right eye twitched. Um, I, I, what I mean is, where did you get that book? Oh, this thing? That really doesn't matter. I just hope it helped. Twilight's eyes spun around to stare straight into the other mare's. Do you feel it? Do you feel the winter is about to end? Do you feel like spring is coming? I better get home. I need to. Fluttershy could not finish her sentence. All she felt was the desire to get away, the need to escape. She wanted so badly to get out of the cold, to find peace and warmth. Even as Twilight smiled at her, deathly and pale from frost, she did not shake or chatter her teeth. This was a creature who embraced the cold. She was no friend. Fluttershy ran as fast as she could out the front door of the library. The snow seemed to have picked up, and was even now beginning to cover the yellow Pegasus in flakes of discomfort. Somewhere behind her, muffled by the wind and the damp snow, Twilight called after her in a guttural shout. "The spring is coming!" Fluttershy didn't bother looking back. All she knew was that she needed to get back to warmth and sanity. That is, if it was even possible to make it all the way home without freezing to death. The farther she trudged through the impending snow, the less likely it seemed, and there was always the thought toying at her from the edges of her mind. She had promised Pinkie that she'd stop back. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. After all, Pinkie would undoubtedly refuel the furnace when she noticed that Fluttershy hadn't done it right. Maybe she could just stop by long enough to warm up before finishing her trek home. It wasn't like she had to go down to that basement, right? The eyes continued to gaze at her. They seemed to be organized in a circle around her, and yet no matter how far she traveled, she never seemed to be any nearer. The insidious chanting continued, exact words muffled by the cold. There was no way she was going to make it home. She was going to succumb either physically to the cold or psychologically to the ponies watching her every move. She wished she could just lie down and push it all from her mind, but desperation did not allow it. After a time that seemed eternity too long, she reached the sugar cube corner once again. The imposing building, almost entirely devoid of color saturation, stood before her. Doing her best not to look in the direction of the basement trapdoor, she mustered up courage she didn't know she had, and rapped on the door. It seemed an eternity that she stood at the doorstep. It wasn't like Pinkie to keep anyone waiting like this. Perhaps she couldn't hear the knock. This seemed improbable, for even though the outside door was quite a distance from the house proper, that had never stopped her friend from answering the door before. She could hear noises, not from inside the house, but from the vast void behind her. Chanting. It was growing louder. The mob was fast approaching. The murmurings gained fervor. The beast neared its prey. The door creaked as it slowly opened. The chanting stopped. Pinkie Pie stood in the door, only immeasurably different from her before. Her hair hung straight on her head. The normally bubbly, bouncy earth pony stood dejectedly in front of her, the very essence of melancholy. Are you alright, Pinkie? Pinkie nodded slightly. She left it at that, staring towards the ground. Fluttershy waited for her to say something else, but nothing else was said. Do you mind if I come in? She seemed to hesitate and looked briefly back behind her towards the heavy door at the top of the stairs. She gestured faintly for Fluttershy to follow her and started up the stairs. Fluttershy breathed a sigh of relief. She was worried about her friend, of course, but the gnawing cold reduced her brain process to a stupor. All she worried about was getting warm and escaping from the hellish landscape outside. She followed her friend up the stairs and through the large oaken door. It was almost immediately that she knew something wasn't right. It was cold. The damnable cold! Was there no relief from it? No place it wouldn't haunt her? She shivered involuntarily and quickly refastened her coat that she had been about to remove. There was more to this dark home than mere cold. It was almost hateful. Fluttershy could feel the walls breathe. She could feel the furniture talking, the knick-knacks staring. She felt nothing but pure venom from this house. It didn't want her here. She recoiled instantly, not wanting to go out into the icy inferno outside, but even more she wanted to escape the hatred she felt in this place. As she stood there, Pinkie hadn't made a move other than stare at her stoically. Fluttershy was at a loss for what to say. After all, if there was one feeling she knew, one truth she could feel above all others, it was to never state out loud that anything was amiss. As she wondered what she could say, a shrill cry from the bedroom down the hall relieved her of the burden. Or so it would seem. Pinkie made no acknowledgement of the noise and continued to stare at the Pegasus. Shouldn't you take care of the foal? She asked tenderly. The earth pony didn't say a word, but after several seconds, she turned and headed down to get the crying foal. In a moment, she returned, holding pumpkin cake in her front foreleg. The baby was crying bloody murder, and apparently sticky and matted. Pinkie made no move to comfort the crying foal, only continuing to stare at Fluttershy. Do you think maybe she's hungry? Pinkie ignored her. Fluttershy was about to ask her once again if anything was wrong, but a sudden feeling stopped her. It wasn't a feeling of fear or warning, but a feeling of pain. Pain emanating from the filly in front of her. There was definitely something wrong with Pumpkin. It wasn't something physical. That was apparent. Something was spiritually torturing this child, and her pain filled the room with unbearable sadness and hate. It was more than Fluttershy could take. She could tell some pony tomorrow. The cakes were returning, right? Right. It could wait. Okay, well, I'm going to go, Fluttershy said softly, with an unsure smile. Pinkie made no movement, so Fluttershy walked down the stairs as quickly as her frozen limbs would let her. The gentle sound of hoof on wood mixed with the indistinguishable utterance coming from behind her. Hesitantly, she turned and looked up at the top of the stairs. Pinkie stood at the top of the stairs, the crying baby in her hooves. Don't go down there. Fluttershy's face flickered in fear and surprise. Was she serious? Did she know Derpy told her that earlier? Or did she remember the story? A surge of fear ran through her veins, even as Pinkie's face remained as impassive as ever. She galloped down the stairs and slammed the door behind her. Closing her eyes, she struggled to catch her breath as large quantities of frozen air filled her chest. She needed to get home. She needed to... Come with me, a voice to her left called. Looking up, she almost passed out in shock. Standing calmly in the snow was an exact copy of herself. This Fluttershy lacked her coat or boots, and its mane was brushed haphazardly to the side of its face, completely covering all but the left half of it. The doppelganger walked down the alleyway towards the dreaded basement door. Fluttershy hesitated, but an unseen force goaded her into following. Whatever this apparition wanted to show her, it was important. She knew it. The figure stopped in front of the trap door, which sprang open as they approached it. A gust of fetid air assaulted their nostrils, but she continued forward, stopping in front of the other Fluttershy. "You need to go down there," it said. Fluttershy's eyes went wide. But, but I... Its glance grew hard and serious, and it spoke in her voice, not soft and timid, but uncharacteristically firm. "You are in danger, Fluttershy. You must do as I say. Go down there and realize that it is not but a basement. Then you must go home. Go home and sleep. If you do not do this, then all hope is lost. Things are not as they seem." "But, well, I mean, go." She turned and looked down the stone stairs. They looked as dark and uninviting as ever. For reasons that were beyond even her comprehension, she started downwards, the impact of her steps resounding through her frozen legs, and there was sharp pain in her hooves. Frostbite. She had to do this. She didn't know why, but she trusted the apparition. It was the only thing that seemed to have an answer. Her submissive personality couldn't resist so clear an order and resolution as that thing offered. She grabbed the door handle in her teeth and pulled. The blackness of the basement room overtook her. The stench of mildew at once assaulted her senses. Indecision ran through her mind, and she looked up at the other Fluttershy standing at the top of the stairs. It gave her a reassuring smile, all that was needed to persuade the lost and desperate pony. She stepped timidly into the room, unable to see anything in front of her. A barely audible dripping sound came from the back corner of the room. She made her way towards it, occasionally bumping into crates. She could hear her heartbeat pounding against her frozen chest the closer she got to the back corner. There's something back there. Something on the floor. The air smells sickly sweet. Something is wrong here. There's a lantern on this crate. With shaking hooves, she gingerly coaxed a spark from the flint lighter, and the lantern glowed to life. The sight she saw would be burned into her mind for all eternity. A mare and a very young filly lay dead on the floor. One of Derpy's eyes had rolled into the back of her head, with only the white remaining. The other was pointed directly at Fluttershy, impassively. A giant bloody gash had torn onto the side of her head, and dry blood covered her fur. The filly at her side was unmistakably the foal she had thought she had just seen. Pumpkin cake. She had a great bruise on her face, and her head was crushed and flattened, as if some pony had dropped her onto a hard surface. She laid there pure and innocent, and yet covered in the blood of her companion in death. The dripping sound somehow pulled her eyes away from the grisly scene. A basin sat on the table next to the corpses. Next to it was a can of some kind of paint or dye that had been upturned and dripped slowly upon the floor. Orange dye, the same color as Pumpkin's fur. "I told you not to come down here." Fluttershy dropped the lantern, which shattered on the floor between her and her pink visitor. She trembled and drew away, wary of the shadowy presence of the earth pony before her. "Why couldn't you just go home?" What did you do?" Fluttershy whimpered, tears flowing down her cheeks at the thought of the dead child. "Well, when you left, I had a little accident. Little Pumpkin was squirming so much, she slipped out of my hooves and bounced down the stairs. I didn't want the cakes to be sad, so I came up with a plan." Pinkie smiled unnaturally as she explained. "All I had to do was find a replacement. So I got some orange dye we used to make food coloring. No pony will ever know the difference, and little Dipsy will grow up nice and happy, because she'll never know she's not Pumpkin." Fluttershy's jaw shook, and she reached the back of the basement. There was no way she could escape if she stood here like this. She would end up like poor Derpy. She had to move. "Come on, Fluttershy, move!" She ran as fast as her legs could carry her. She had to get away. She had to tell some pony about this. With a renewed burst of adrenaline, she dashed past the impassive Pinkamania and put up the stairs. She climbed the stairs and anticipated where she should go for help. Applejack? Too far. Rainbow Dash? She didn't know if she could fly, as cold as she was. Something on top of the stairs made her to stop. Standing still, In the snow, exactly where she had been when Fluttershy saw her for the first time, was Derby Hooves. Unlike the first time, her fur was matted with dry blood, and there was a gash of open flesh and brains upon her head. She looked exactly like the pony she saw in the basement. Derby didn't move, didn't talk, and did nothing other than hold that same bundle of rags and stare at her. Even as Fluttershy felt the last remains of sane composure slipping, a layer of sheets fell off the bundle Derby was holding. She was holding not Titsy, but pumpkin cake. The foal was just as bloody and destroyed as the mare holding her, perhaps even more so. She suckled at Derby's teat in ignorance of everything else as drops of blood steadily stayed in the snow. Fluttershy couldn't take it anymore. She screamed at the top of her lungs. Dashing away from the horrendous figure, she bounded towards a destination that her subconscious seemed to have predetermined for her. The farther she fled, the more demonic the landscape became. The moon became as of blood, and almost as bright as the sun. Moonbeams traveling through the cloud cover impacted the ground like a light beaming from hell itself. The entire town was watching her, the blood-red light of its unholy moon reflecting off their eyes. The chanting was thunderous, as harsh, cold strokes across stringed instruments accompanied the satanic hymn. The volume was such that it was all she could do to continue desperately towards her destination in lay of covering her ears. No longer was the chant indecipherable. Sanguis, 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 sanguis. Every utterance shoved Fluttershy's heart into chaos, and every step seemed to drain any physical energy still remaining in her body. The town of Ponyville was completely unrecognizable. Where once pastel-colored houses stood, grotesque structures made of flesh and bone and plastered with caked blood dominated her vision. No other pony seemed to notice or care, being completely obsessed with staring at her, staring and chanting. Rounding the corner, she could see the colossus of the Golden Oaks Library. It seemed taller and more significant than ever before, towering over the town. Hellish fires illuminated every window. Corpses of lynched ponies hung from every branch on various states of decay. Not even stopping to think, she panted up in the front door of the oak tree, knocking as hard as she could, and collapsed. The chanting grew louder, and it grew nearer. She could hear hoofsteps all around her, a carrion swarm coming to feed. Panic consumed her. Where is Twilight? What's taking so long? As if in answer of her prayers, the door of the imposing structure creaked open. A very tired and listless Twilight stood over her, rubbing her eyes. Fluttershy, Fluttershy, what are you doing here? Twilight, She couldn't finish her statement. She was so exhausted. She couldn't stand up. She was so cold and pale the snow simply felt soft and uncharacteristically comforting, like a bed one would lie down and die in. Her mouth refused to work as she couldn't think of what to say. "Oh, hi, Pinkie. You're here too?" said Twilight brightly to a figure behind Fluttershy. Craning her head, she saw the pink earth pony grinning behind her. It was horrifying. Nothing about this figure looked anything like Pinkie Pie. The grin was anticipating, hateful, every evil emotion one could have, but also affection. Fluttershy was confused, scared, yes, but also confused. The large crowd of ponies had gathered around them, the red din and various snowstorm obscuring their features, but their unholy chant built up into a crescendo as the wording changed. "Eat of thy flesh, drink of the chalice of thine blood. Only then will forgiveness be given to thee. Amen." In an apocalyptic change of emotion, Fluttershy died. What did it matter anymore? Why let the fear take hold? If this is to be the end, then letting fear boil over inside of her would do no good. She let out a great sigh, a sigh of loss and resignation. Pinkie Pie leaned over her, an inch from her face, and grinned even more broadly. "I love you, Fluttershy." "I love you too, Pinkie Pie." Pinkie smiled lovingly as she bit into her friend's right eyeball. Teeth tore away a chunk of flesh like the white of a hard-boiled egg. Blood and occipital fluid gasped forth. matting the fur of Fluttershy's face. Spring will never come, but at least the horrors of winter will end. Oh my god. That was Don't Go Down There by Closet Brony 87. I hope you enjoyed this. I sure did. Goodbye.